Hi, my name is Carol Howard Merritt. I'm a pastor in the Presbyterian Church, and I've been in ministry in different contexts, both in Rhode Island and in Washington, D.C., and also in the rural parts of Louisiana. I come to ministry now as a writer, and I am helping my husband as he starts a new church development in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We've just begun this venture, and I'm excited to see what happens with it. Right now, we're in this incredible time in our mainline church tradition and in the religious tradition of the country. And it's a fascinating time because so many things are changing, so many things are shifting, and many of the things that we relied upon for the last few decades seem to be breaking down. This is difficult when you're a church or when you're a pastor struggling in a particular church. But as we begin to step back and we see the larger trends that are occurring, I think we can begin to sort of have a prophetic imagination about what might be ahead of us. I know there are many things that are affecting our congregations. Oftentimes, it's just a matter of simple geography. And many times we have been planting congregations in rural areas, and these particular congregations have been flourishing and doing amazing ministry for decade after decade. Right now, we're seeing a shift that's occurring, and it's not because rural churches or rural church pastors have been unfaithful or that they're doing something wrong, but simply there is a shift in the geographic patterns of where people are moving. We've gone from an agrarian society to an industrial society to a tech and service industry related society, and now we're moving into an economy that no one quite knows exactly where we're going. Well, all of this affects the church because it affects the living patterns of generations. And there was one time where in a rural area you had 5,000 farmers, a bank, a post office, schools. And now, as we see, those 5,000 farmers might be 5 farmers. And the bank has shut down, the hardware store has shut down, the post office has shut down. And now we find that churches are struggling in the same way. There are other factors that are involved with the transformation that's occurring. Not only are we shifting geographically from rural areas to urban and suburban areas, but there's also some cultural and generational shifts that are occurring. Culturally, many times people don't have it in their DNA to be church people or to grow up in churches. And so we have a generation that's coming of age where Robert Putnam says that just about 18% of young adults have never stepped into a church before in their lives. It's actually 18% of college students, which is particularly stressful because I think that college students go to church more often than college-educated people go to church more often than people who may not be college educated. So it's no longer the underlying assumption in our society that people will be expected to go to church. In fact, it's a little odd, it's a little awkward sometimes when you're a person in a new generation and you're explaining that you're going to church. Many times you have to explain, I'm going to church, but it's not like that. It's not this church that you may have seen on the news media, or it's not the church that you may have experienced in your past. So going to church, especially for mainline traditions, is no longer a social reality for many younger generations. Another thing that's happening is that there are generational shifts that are occurring. With younger generations, many people have, for younger generations, many times people have different problems and different needs. And I'm not saying that their economic situation is necessarily worse than the generations before, but they are different. We have a generation that's growing up in our society where they are expected to go into tremendous debt in order to get an education. Oftentimes, they have to face rising housing costs, and they have to face rising costs of living when it comes to food or to gas or to just getting around, or medical expenses. When you think about medical expenses, we know that young Americans in our country are the most uninsured group in our nation. And there are so many factors when it comes to unemployment and underemployment. This has become a part of the national dialogue in so many areas, but many times it's not a part of our struggle when it comes to church. And so when a young person walks into a church, and oftentimes they're burdened by this situation of unemployment, they're burdened by a situation of student loan debt, they're burdened by a situation of having to move away from their family and their friends for job opportunities. Oftentimes we come into our churches with this tremendous burden, and yet congregations are very rarely talking about it. Many times congregations are worried about their own debt, and rightly so, yet it's difficult to become part of that worshiping community when you know that you may not have so much to give. And so how can we begin to imagine what to do in the future as some churches close, as we begin to rearrange our geographic locations? Can we begin to start focusing on urban ministries? Can we begin to start planting new churches in urban areas, as I know this diocese has done and done well? Can we begin to think about strategically how we're going to reach out to the next generation? Can we imagine what we're going to do to lovingly care for the buildings that are entrusted into us and that are extremely vital and important resources in communities that are often having a difficult time and struggling? Can we begin to imagine worshiping communities that have in the center a core care and desire and longing to help a new generation where it is? And can we have communities that don't expect new generations to culturally commute, as one of my friends often says, but can we begin to accept them where they are, with their debt, with their inability to make things things meet and to meet their needs? Can we begin to accept them in the space in which they're challenged and need to be challenged? And most importantly, in all of this, I hope that we can begin to imagine communities in which we learn to share with one another in new ways. This is a difficult time in our country, and particularly for the generation that's coming up. And as we go into the future and think about the church in the future, can we begin to imagine how it will be to think about the care, the needs, not only in our own communities, in our own budgets, in our own buildings that often need so much repair, not only in our own struggles, but how we can affect and care for those whom God has called together.